I thought I knew what I was walking into. An abandoned mine. No big deal, right? Just another place left to rot in the quiet corners of Florida, forgotten by most, if not all. A few miles off the highway, overgrown with weeds and hidden beneath layers of dust, it should have been nothing more than a relic from the past. A place where rusted equipment and broken beams whispered of a time when people worked, lived, and toiled there. It seemed like an easy exploration. I could already see it in my mind, stepping through the rotting doors, poking around the old tunnels, maybe taking a few pictures. Nothing more. But the moment I set foot inside, everything changed. I felt it. The change in the air, that shift in the atmosphere. It was as if I wasn't alone. And no, it wasn't just the feeling you get when you're exploring somewhere this old and forgotten. It was something deeper. Something I couldn't explain. But I could feel it crawl down my spine like fingers of ice, spreading from the back of my neck to my chest. My heart started beating a little faster, my breath just a little too loud in the silent darkness. The deeper I went into that mine, the worse it got. And I swear, I thought I heard things, scratching noises from deep within the walls, the faintest whisper that seemed to echo in the tunnels, like someone was moving just out of sight. I kept thinking it was the wind, or maybe the old wood settling under its own weight. But the more I listened, the less I could convince myself. The sounds didn't make sense. There was no breeze, no reason for the sounds to be there. It was only when I found that strange room, hidden far behind the collapsed walls, untouched by time, that I realized this wasn't just an abandoned mine anymore. There was something else. Something that had been there long before I arrived. And something that wasn't going to let me leave so easily. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I'd explored plenty of abandoned places before, old houses, factories, warehouses. But this was different. I thought it was just another thrill, another abandoned spot to add to my list. But I was wrong. And as I turned around, just to get back to the entrance, I realized I wasn't alone. Not just in the way you feel someone staring at you from behind. No, this was different. Something in the dark, watching, waiting. A presence that made the air grow heavy, thicker with every step I took deeper into the mine. I wish I had left then. I wish I had turned around before it was too late, before I found the things I shouldn't have seen. But once I was there, once I'd stepped that far, there was no going back. The truth about what was waiting down there, and the thing that had been hidden in the darkness, waiting for me, was far worse than anything I could have ever prepared myself for. The real question, though, is this: why did I ever go in there? What was it that pulled me so deep into that place? Was it just my curiosity, or was something else drawing me in, something I still can't explain? Whatever it was, I learned that sometimes there are things you're better off never knowing. But I learned them anyway, and it's a lesson I'll never forget. I've always been drawn to the unknown. Ever since I was a kid, I'd wander through forests, sneak into old houses, and explore forgotten places, fascinated by what others had left behind. There's something about abandoned spaces, silent, still, untouched, that just calls to me. It's like stepping into a moment frozen in time, a world that no one remembers or cares about anymore. But for some reason, that's always felt like the most real part of our history, the one that isn't sanitized or scrubbed away for the public. So when I first heard about this mine, I wasn't scared. I was excited, and when I heard it had been abandoned for decades, that was the part that hooked me. I had heard whispers. A few people mentioned it in passing, some saying the mine was dangerous, that it had been shut down because of accidents. Others said it was cursed. But I didn't believe in that stuff. Ghost stories were just that, stories. And curses? Well, they were just tales people told to make the past seem more exciting than it really was. I wasn't afraid of any of that. I was just looking for a good story, a place to explore and share with the world. Something to show off to my followers, maybe even something that could help build my reputation. This mine had a history. Built in the 1800s, it was once a major part of Florida's mining industry. They extracted everything from limestone to copper, and some say they even mined for gold in its early days. But like most industrial projects, it was left behind when it became too dangerous. The workers had their share of injuries, even a few deaths, but nothing that stood out at first glance. The real story came later, when the town started to change and the mine was sealed off for good. That's when the rumors started. Some said it was because of the accidents. Others said it was something darker, something that even the workers feared. But I didn't listen to those stories. I wasn't there to dig up legends. I was there for the thrill of exploring something no one had touched in years. I thought I'd find an abandoned building, a few relics from the past, maybe some graffiti from kids who snuck in before me. That's what I was expecting. And to be honest, that's all I wanted. A little excitement, a few chills down my spine to share with my friends. I didn't know the mine had a history beyond its walls, a history that would latch on to me and never let go. When I first stood in front of that mine, I felt a strange pull. It wasn't a spooky feeling, more like a draw, like a magnet. A place that had been so ignored, so overlooked for so long, suddenly felt important. Like I was meant to find it, like I was the first person to ever truly see it. The entrance was hidden behind thick trees, the rusted metal of the old door barely visible through the vines and moss. I remember stepping forward, thinking to myself, this is going to be incredible. I felt like a pioneer, uncovering something no one had dared to touch in years. But that feeling of excitement, that eagerness to discover, to share something new, it didn't last long. It was replaced by something much worse, the creeping realization that some things are better left untouched. As I stepped through the rotting doorway, the first thing that hit me wasn't the dust or the cobwebs, but the smell. It was like an old, damp cellar that hadn't seen daylight in decades. That thick, musty odor of mold mixed with rust, like iron that had been left to decay too long. The air itself seemed to weigh down on me, heavy and almost oppressive, as though it didn't want me to be there. It felt wrong. I could barely breathe, like the air was too thick to pull into my lungs. I thought about turning back, but curiosity tugged harder. I took my first few steps inside, the beam from my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. It barely lit up the darkness, casting long, grotesque shadows against the walls of jagged stone and crumbling brick. Every movement felt exaggerated, like my body was out of sync with the place, making every step feel unnatural. It was quiet, too quiet, but that silence was the kind that sets your nerves on edge, like something was just waiting to pounce from the shadows. The ground beneath me was uneven, coated in a layer of damp earth and forgotten debris. My boots scraped against loose rocks, sending soft echoes through the mine. But it wasn't the sound of my own footsteps that caught my attention first. It was something else, a soft, almost imperceptible noise coming from deeper inside the mine. At first I couldn't place it. It was too distant, like the faintest scratching or scurrying, a sound so subtle you could easily convince yourself it was the wind, or maybe an animal that had made its way in long ago. But there was no wind down here, and no animals, at least not that I could see. I took another step forward, my flashlight flicking nervously over the walls. The tunnel stretched ahead of me, narrowing as it twisted into the darkness, until it disappeared into an almost impenetrable black void. My heart started to pound, the silence now feeling like a pressure against my chest. I could feel my breath, shallow and quick, cutting through the still air, but even my own presence felt like it didn't belong. It was the kind of isolation that made your skin crawl, like being watched by something that was just out of sight, lingering at the edge of your awareness. The deeper I went, the colder it got. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the air itself. It wasn't just that I felt cold, it was that the cold felt wrong, like it was seeping into my bones. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. A chill that wasn't natural, that felt like it had been waiting there for me, growing colder with each step I took. And then I heard it again, this time clearer. A faint scrape, like metal against stone. It came from somewhere deeper in the mine. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. The sound was distinct, unmistakable, as though something or someone was moving in the distance, deliberately and with purpose. I shone my flashlight down the tunnel, the beam catching a few broken beams of wood and the twisted remnants of metal cables that hung from the walls. They rattled softly, not from any wind, but from something I couldn't explain. The walls themselves seemed to sigh, groaning under the weight of the years. But the scraping sound, it was real, and it was getting closer. I held my breath and listened. The silence had returned, but it wasn't the same. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on me from all sides. I glanced around, my mind racing, my pulse echoing in my ears. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows deepening like the tunnel was growing narrower with each passing second. I started to feel dizzy, lightheaded, as though the darkness was pulling me deeper into its embrace. I stepped forward again, cautiously this time. My flashlight flickered, a sharp stutter of light that made my heart leap. The beam danced along the walls, revealing more of the mine's twisted interior. Rusted tools, broken carts, shattered glass that glittered like forgotten diamonds. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A shadow. Just a glimpse. Nothing more. But it moved, and it wasn't the natural sway of the broken beams or the drift of dust in the air. It was purposeful. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the thick blackness stretching endlessly in all directions. The silence pressed in again, and for a moment I thought I imagined it. But then came the scrape again. Louder this time. It was right behind me. So close I could almost feel it, like something was just at the edge of the beam of light, waiting to step into it. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, but once again the darkness swallowed everything. There was nothing there, nothing but the feeling that I wasn't alone, that whatever was in the mine with me, it had been there long before I ever set foot inside. The cold was sharper now, biting at my skin. I wasn't just scared. I was starting to feel like I was being drawn into something, pulled deeper into the mine. My heart hammered in my chest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something down here, something that didn't want me to leave, something that had been waiting, hidden in the shadows for far too long. I kept moving deeper into the mine, my flashlight flickering as if it too wasn't sure it wanted to be there. The air felt colder now, biting through my jacket, and my breath came out in quick, visible bursts. My footsteps echoed louder with every step, but soon, it wasn't just my footsteps I was hearing. There was another sound, almost like something dragging across the ground, soft but unmistakable. I paused, straining my ears. Nothing. The dragging stopped. I swallowed hard, trying to push the sudden tightness in my chest aside. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe the air was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to steady myself, but as I turned the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, lying on the ground in the middle of the tunnel, was an old, worn-out backpack. The kind you'd expect from someone who'd been hiking or exploring. The straps were frayed, and the fabric was stained. But what struck me was the way it was positioned. The zipper was halfway open, and something white was sticking out, a piece of cloth, maybe. It looked like it had been tossed there carelessly, but there was something unsettling about it, like it had been left in a hurry. I couldn't help but inch closer, my heart thumping harder with every step. I bent down, my flashlight casting a trembling beam over the bag. Something inside shifted. A faint sound. I pulled my hand back. What was that? Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, darting past the entrance to the next tunnel. I jerked my head toward it, but there was nothing there, just darkness. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. Could it have been a person? Someone else exploring? Or was it something else? I had to know. So I pressed on, trying to shake the unease that had settled deep in my bones. But the deeper I went, the more the air seemed to thicken. The mine felt like it was closing in around me, suffocating me. The walls, once distant, now felt like they were crowding in, And that sound, scraping, scratching, came again, louder this time. But this time it wasn't coming from the walls. It was behind me. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping across the space, but again, nothing. Just the dark, silent tunnel stretching endlessly in front of me. My pulse raced as I took a few more steps, trying to calm my nerves. And then, as I turned another corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, on the wall, were markings, strange, jagged lines carved into the stone. Not the kind of graffiti you'd expect from a bored explorer, but something more deliberate, something older. And at the bottom, a symbol, etched so deeply into the rock that I could see the marks were fresh, even though the rest of the mine looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I stepped closer, my fingers instinctively reaching out, but something made me hesitate. A feeling, a whisper. It was like the mine was warning me to leave. The air turned ice-cold around me, and my instincts screamed to turn back, but I couldn't. Something was pulling me deeper in. I had to see what was at the end of this tunnel. Just as I took another step forward, I heard a sound. This time, it was unmistakable, a footstep, right behind me. I froze. My blood ran cold. The sound was too close to be from my own movement. It wasn't the echo of my own steps. This was something else, something real, something alive. I spun around, my flashlight swinging wildly, but again, nothing. The tunnel was empty. There was no one there. My heart raced, my breath shallow and quick, as I backed away from the spot where the sound had come from. I couldn't explain it. I had to get out. But just as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A movement in the shadows, barely visible, but unmistakable. A figure, standing motionless in the darkness, watching me. I froze again. My flashlight faltered, its beam casting shaky light across the tunnel. I tried to move to step forward, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, as still as the mine itself, yet I knew it was waiting for me to make the first move. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Was it another explorer? Was it something else? My gut told me I didn't want to find out. I turned, my legs shaking, and took a few quick steps back toward the entrance. The mine felt like it was fighting me, as if the walls themselves were shifting, guiding me away from the exit. And then, just as I reached the point where I thought the tunnel would open up again, the footsteps came, louder, closer. My heart pounded in my chest, and the mine seemed to swallow every sound. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. Too quiet. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft, almost like a breath, but chilling in its intent. It wasn't in front of me. It wasn't behind me. It was all around me. It said my name. I don't know what possessed me to go further, but I did. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the mine itself was trying to keep me trapped in its embrace. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight, its beam flickering uncertainly, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls like something alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, lurking in the dark, watching me as I explored. But no matter how many times I looked over my shoulder, there was never anyone there. Just the suffocating darkness and that cold, dead silence. I continued, moving through the tunnels, my heart pounding faster now. I came across another narrow passageway, its entrance almost concealed by fallen debris and twisted roots. The tunnel looked different, older. As I squeezed through the gap, I felt the temperature drop sharply, as if I'd crossed an invisible line into something else. The air turned stale, thick with a sickly metallic scent, almost like blood, but not quite. Then I saw it. There at the far end of the passage was a large metal door, not old and rusted like the others, but something newer, clean, almost pristine, in stark contrast to the decaying surroundings. It stood out like a sore thumb, and as I moved closer, I noticed the strange symbols carved into its surface. Some I didn't recognize, others that made my skin crawl. They were etched into the metal so deeply, it looked as though the door had been marked with something more than just tools. Something ancient. A sharp, nauseating feeling spread through me as I reached out to touch the door. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface, and the moment I did, I felt a strange pull, a pressure that seemed to come from the door itself, like it was alive. But I didn't have time to pull my hand away. Before I knew it, the door creaked open on its own. I was greeted by an overwhelming rush of cold air that hit me like a wall. My breath caught in my throat, my heart racing now, louder than ever. The light from my flashlight barely cut through the thick darkness that lay beyond. I stepped inside, cautiously at first, my eyes trying to adjust. The room was massive, far larger than the rest of the mine. And it was different. This wasn't a place where people had worked. This felt like something had been living here. A pit in my stomach opened up as I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. In the center of the room, a large stone altar stood, covered in what I first thought was dirt. But as I moved closer, the flickering light revealed something far worse. There were strange stains on the stone, blackened, dark, like something had been spilled there and soaked into the cracks of the rock. Then I noticed the walls. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols that seemed to writhe and twist on their own, no matter where I looked. They weren't just etched into the surface, they were growing, as though the very stone was alive, changing before my eyes. Some of the symbols looked like faces, contorted and screaming, their mouths open in eternal agony. I stepped back, my heart in my throat, my hands clammy with sweat. What the hell was this place? And then as I stood there, staring in shock at the altar, I heard it. A whisper. At first it was so faint I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but it came again, louder this time. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a low murmur, as though dozens of people were speaking at once, their words overlapping and jumbled together in some language I couldn't understand. The sound seemed to fill the room, vibrating through my chest, and with each passing second it grew louder, more urgent. I swung my flashlight around, my hand trembling. The beam landed on someone, standing at the far end of the room. I froze. My mouth went dry. There, just beyond the altar, was a figure. At first I thought it was another person, but as I focused I realized the truth. It was wrong. A man, or at least it looked like one. His body was hunched unnaturally, his limbs too long, his skin stretched too tight over bone, like something that had been twisted and forced into a shape it was never meant to take. His eyes, I couldn't see them clearly at first, but I could feel them, locked onto me, watching me, seeing right through me. I backed up, my legs shaking beneath me, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The whispering grew louder, the room seemed to close in on me, and just as I turned to flee, I felt it. A cold, clammy hand wrapped around my ankle, pulling me backward. I screamed, stumbling, trying to kick free, but whatever was holding me wasn't human. It dragged me closer to the altar, and as I looked down, I saw what I had missed before. Bones. Human bones, littering the ground around the altar, broken, shattered remains of people who hadn't just died, but had been sacrificed. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These people hadn't just disappeared, they had been taken. And now the whispers were louder, rising to a deafening pitch as the figure moved closer, his long fingers outstretched toward me. I scrambled, desperate to get away, but my body refused to cooperate. The figure took a step forward, his face, his horrible face, coming into view. His eyes weren't eyes at all. They were pits of blackness, endless and consuming, swirling with something ancient, something that shouldn't have existed. And then, before I could scream, his mouth opened. But no sound came out. Instead, a cold wind howled through the room, and the ground beneath me trembled. And in that moment, I realized something truly terrifying. It wasn't the figure that I was afraid of. It was what was coming after it. The mine, the walls, the very earth itself, they were alive. They had been waiting for me. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. The door was pulling me in, like it wanted me to open it, to cross that line, to step into whatever lay behind it. But as my hand lingered on the cold metal, I heard something. A low rumble. It wasn't a sound from the mine. It came from inside the walls, deep beneath my feet. The ground trembled just slightly, like the whole mine was awakening. I pulled my hand away and took a step back, trying to collect myself. But before I could think, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if something was walking toward me. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand, but there was no one there. Just the shadows, swallowing up the narrow passage. I started moving again, backing away from the door, but the sound of those footsteps didn't stop. In fact, it sped up. I froze, my eyes darting to the dark corners of the mine, but still I saw nothing. It was as if whatever was following me was just out of sight, always a few steps behind, but growing closer with every breath. I knew I needed to get out. Turning sharply, I bolted toward the main tunnel, the one that led me deeper into the mine. My breath was coming too fast, too loud, but I couldn't stop now. My footfalls echoed, but the sound of dragging footsteps behind me was louder now, closer. My pulse surged as I sprinted, desperate to get back to the entrance. The mine felt different now. It wasn't just the twisting, confusing passageways, it was like the walls themselves had changed. The familiar layout of the tunnels had become a labyrinth, and every turn seemed to send me deeper into the bowels of the mine, as if I were being guided or trapped. I rounded a corner and saw the faintest glimmer of light ahead, the exit just within reach, but when I ran toward it, the space seemed to stretch further away. The tunnel never ended. My chest tightened. I turned around again, scanning the darkness, and I heard it. The unmistakable sound of breath, heavy, labored, like something was gasping for air just behind me. But there was no one. Nothing. I had to get out. I sprinted forward again, panic rising in my throat as I rounded another corner, only to find the tunnel blocked by piles of debris. Rusted pipes, collapsed wood, and a tangle of sharp metal beams. My heart stopped. The exit was gone. I was trapped. My flashlight flickered and sputtered as I desperately tried to clear the debris. No. I scrambled back, my pulse thundering in my ears, and in that moment I heard something else. A deep, guttural sound, like a growl but low, almost as if it was coming from deep within the earth itself. A chill swept over me, colder than anything I had felt before, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The air turned frigid. I felt something behind me, something. My skin prickled with dread as I slowly turned. At first I saw nothing, but then, there it was. A shape, tall but hunched, barely visible in the shadows, standing motionless at the edge of the tunnel. It was human-shaped, but not quite human. The features were wrong, too elongated. The limbs twisted in unnatural angles, and the face, if you could even call it a face, was covered in tattered cloth, barely holding together. A low, rasping sound came from it, like dry leaves being crushed in its throat. My legs locked in place, but my mind screamed for me to run. My feet stumbled backward, and just as I turned to make a break for it, the creature stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, its body jerking unnaturally as it moved. I felt the ground beneath me shift, as if the very earth was rising up to stop me. I spun, my heart in my throat, and ran in the opposite direction, my body on autopilot, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the cramping in my legs. The sound of dragging footsteps behind me had grown louder, closer, faster. I risked a glance over my shoulder, just for a split second, and saw it. The figure was still following me, but now, its hands were outstretched, its fingers impossibly long, reaching toward me like they were trying to grasp the very air. I had to make it. My feet were pounding against the stone floor, the tunnel twisting in every direction, but every time I turned a corner, the walls seemed to close in on me. The exit, the entrance, should have been just ahead, but it was nowhere in sight. Just darkness, stretching infinitely. My breath came in ragged gasps, and that sound, the sound of something dragging behind me, something breathing, was too close now. I could feel the coldness of its presence, as if it were just inches away. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I felt my legs begin to give way beneath me, but I forced myself to keep moving. But then, everything went still. I stopped. In the middle of the tunnel, the air thick with dread, the dragging sound stopped. The breath stopped. It was dead quiet, too quiet. I couldn't hear anything, not the creature, not even my own heartbeat. It was as if the mine had swallowed me whole, and I was the last person alive left to die in its cold, suffocating grip. I stood frozen, not daring to breathe, not daring to make a sound. My hand was still on the flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it on. The shadows felt alive, curling around me, squeezing in from all sides. Every instinct I had told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. Only this time they weren't following me. They were ahead of me, and they were getting closer. Before I could react, a hand gripped my shoulder, cold as ice, sending a shock through my entire body. I spun around, the flashlight snapping on in my hand, but there was nothing there. The mine was empty. The only sound was my own ragged breath, the harsh reality of the silence closing in. I felt something brush my arm. I wasn't alone anymore. The mine had never been empty, not once. And that thing wasn't going to let me leave. Not until it was done with me. I don't know how long I had been running. My legs were burning, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but I couldn't stop. The walls of the mine seemed to close in around me, the tunnels narrowing as though the mine itself was trying to trap me. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could hear my own panicked footsteps. But the sound of something else, those dragging footsteps, was louder now, unmistakable. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Whatever it was coming for me. I stumbled over the rough ground, my flashlight flashing erratically, illuminating nothing but a wall of thick shadows. I rounded another corner, expecting to find some way out, but instead I found myself in a vast chamber, larger than any I had seen so far. The air in here was colder, almost freezing. My breath formed little clouds in front of me, and my entire body felt the bite of the temperature. But it wasn't the cold that made my skin prickle with fear. It was the presence. I could feel it, pressing in from all sides. I wasn't alone anymore. It was in here with me. Then I saw it. At the far end of the chamber, half hidden in darkness, was someone standing still. It wasn't a person. It couldn't have been. The figure was too tall, too unnaturally still. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second I thought I saw its face. A face that wasn't a face at all, just a twisted mass of shadows, features constantly shifting, like something not meant to be seen. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It wasn't human, and it wasn't alone. From the corners of the chamber, the shadows shifted, and I realized there were more of them, all around me, watching, waiting. I could feel their eyes on me, piercing through the dark, invisible, yet undeniable. The very air seemed to hum with a low, vibrating energy, as though something was reaching into me from the depths of the earth, trying to touch my mind. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I was paralyzed, locked in place by an invisible force, every part of me screaming to run but unable to make a sound, unable to take a step. Then, it moved. It didn't walk like a person. It glided, its form shifting and stretching as though it could bend the laws of reality itself. As it drew closer, I saw its arms, long and spindly, stretched far too far to belong to any human being. Its fingers were unnaturally thin, sharp, like the claws of a creature from some nightmare. But it wasn't the shape of its body that terrified me. It was the presence, the weight of its being pressing down on me, suffocating me. And then it spoke. But it didn't speak with a voice. No, it whispered, inside my mind, "Leave before it's too late." The words were like ice, slithering into my thoughts, cold and piercing. The voice was not a voice. It was a thought, a command, an order that crawled beneath my skin and wrapped itself around my heart. Every part of me screamed to get away, to run, but the thing in front of me wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving toward me. And as it did, I felt a strange pressure inside my chest, like I was being pulled closer to it, forced to obey. I took a step back and then another, but the ground beneath me suddenly shifted, collapsed. The tunnel I had been standing in gave way, and I fell, tumbling down into a deeper, darker pit. I couldn't see anything now, nothing but the pitch-black void that seemed to swallow everything around me. My hands scraped against the cold, jagged stone as I tried to catch myself, but the force of the fall was too much. For a moment, I thought I'd died. I thought maybe I'd hit the bottom, and the world had finally given way. But when I opened my eyes, I realized that I wasn't alone anymore. It was there, in the shadows, and it was getting closer. I scrambled to my feet, panicked and disoriented, but I could hear the scraping sound again, the dragging sound, closer now. I turned and tried to find an exit, but there were no doors, no passages, just the endless black. I couldn't escape, and the thing behind me wasn't waiting anymore. I could feel its presence moving toward me, fast. In that moment, the air seemed to grow heavier again, thick with dread. The shadows pressed in closer, and I could feel something cold, too cold, against the back of my neck. My heart was pounding, my breath erratic, but I couldn't stop. I had to run. I pushed through the darkness, moving blindly, stumbling over rocks and debris. Every step felt like it could be my last. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that if I stopped, if I looked, it would be too late. And then I heard it. That low growl, so close now, it reverberated through my bones. I turned to look, and that's when I saw it again. The thing. The shape, so tall and twisted, standing just behind me, its glowing eyes piercing through the blackness. I didn't think. I just ran. I ran for my life, every instinct screaming at me to get out, now. But as I ran, I realized something that chilled me to my core. I wasn't sure if the mine had an exit anymore. I wasn't sure if I was running away from it, or if it had already won. I should have known, right then and there, that there was no escape. Not really. But at that moment, with those twisted shadows moving closer, with the air so thick and cold I could barely breathe, I didn't care. All I knew was I had to get out of that mine. Now. I turned and ran, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else, every warning bell going off in my head. But it didn't matter how fast I ran. The tunnels twisted and turned in ways I couldn't remember. Each corner I rounded seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of the mine. Every time I thought I saw a way out, another wall of darkness rose up in front of me. It was like the mine was alive, shifting, trapping me, pulling me back to that chamber where the things in the shadows were waiting. Then, just as I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled into something different. It was a narrow passage, one I hadn't seen before. At first I thought it was just another dead end, but as I pushed forward, I saw a faint light, flickering, weak, but it was there. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a way out. But it wasn't the light that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was the smell, the same foul, metallic scent from earlier, now thicker, stronger. I looked down to see what I had tripped over, and that's when my heart nearly stopped. There, lying on the cold, damp floor, was a small object. A necklace, its chain tarnished and old. But it wasn't just any necklace. This one had a strange, jagged symbol etched into the pendant, a symbol that matched the ones I'd seen on the door, the ones that had been carved into the mine. I didn't want to touch it, but my hands, they reached for it anyway. The moment my fingers closed around the cold metal, I heard it again, the dragging sound, now much closer, right behind me. I spun around, heart racing, expecting to see one of those figures from the chamber, but nothing was there. Just the stillness of the mine, swallowing up any noise. But I knew I wasn't alone. I backed away from the necklace, my instincts screaming at me to leave it. But the moment I looked at it again, the symbol seemed to shift. The metal twisted, and the jagged edges of the pendant seemed to grow, as if the object itself was alive, hungry, pulling me toward it. I dropped it with a sharp gasp, stumbling backward. It clinked against the stone floor, but as soon as it hit, the dragging sound stopped. I turned and ran again, harder this time, desperate to escape. The light ahead was getting brighter, clearer, and I could taste the freedom, the air outside. I didn't look back, didn't dare. My legs burned with every step, but the tunnel was finally straightening out. It felt like I was almost there, almost free. But just as I neared the entrance, I heard it, the most chilling sound of all, a whisper. Soft at first, so faint I almost missed it. But then it grew louder, clearer, and I could make out the words, "You can't leave." My heart skipped. I sprinted toward the exit, but the ground beneath me shook violently, and I heard something crack, loud and sickening, like bones snapping under pressure. The exit, the very path I had thought was my escape, suddenly slammed shut. The massive rocks blocking the tunnel fell into place, sealing me inside. The whisper came again, and this time it was closer, right behind me, breathing down my neck. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. The mind seemed to come alive, the walls pulsing as if breathing, watching, waiting. It was as if the darkness itself was wrapping around me, smothering me, pushing me into the corners of the mine. I ran, no longer thinking, no longer seeing. It was all just a blur, my mind focused only on getting away. I had no idea where I was going anymore. The air had turned sharp, colder than before, and my body was shaking uncontrollably. I could hear my breath, ragged, desperate, and something else. The same dragging sound, getting closer, faster. And then I saw it. The exit, the light, the outside. With a final burst of energy, I leaped toward it, crashing through the last stretch of tunnel. My hand brushed against the rocks at the entrance, and with one last desperate push, I was free. But when I crawled out of that mine, gasping for air, covered in dirt and sweat, I thought I had escaped. I was wrong. I've never been able to shake that feeling, that presence that followed me. It's like I never really left the mine, like something is always there, just out of sight. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear those dragging footsteps again, echoing through the silence of my home. And when the wind picks up, when it's cold enough, I swear I can feel that icy breath on the back of my neck. I've learned one thing for sure. Some places, some things don't let go. Not ever. And whatever I found down there, whatever saw me, it's not finished with me yet. Picking up that necklace, feeling the cold metal of it in my hand, I could have sworn the mind seemed to shudder. It was like something had been disturbed, something that had been lying dormant for so long, and now it was awake. I could hear the faintest whisper, barely audible over the sound of my own panicked breathing. It wasn't a voice I could recognize, no words, just an oppressive cold presence seeping through the walls. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to understand what it meant. But deep down, I knew that necklace wasn't just some relic. It wasn't just an old trinket someone had dropped long ago. It was part of the mine, part of whatever had been sealed away in that dark, forgotten place. And somehow, I knew it was connected to what I had felt, to the horrors I'd seen, to the things I still didn't understand. I couldn't stay in there any longer. My legs felt like they were made of stone, but I forced myself to stand and run, to get out of that cursed place. Every corner I turned, every dark hallway I sprinted through, I kept hearing it. The dragging footsteps, the heavy breathing, the scrape of claws against the stone, following me, getting closer. Somehow, I made it back to the entrance. The air outside felt like a blessing, even though it was still thick with the suffocating weight of what I'd just experienced. But when I looked back at that mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me anymore, but that didn't mean I was safe. Whatever it was that had been down there, it had left its mark on me. And somehow I knew it was still out there. I don't know if it followed me home or if I just never really escaped. But I know this for sure, that mine was never meant to be uncovered. Some places, some things, should be left buried. I thought I had closed the door to that chapter. I thought I had left it behind when I stepped out of the mine. But the truth is, it never really left me. I don't know if that necklace was a warning, a curse, or something even worse. All I know is that every night, when the wind howls just right, or when the shadows grow long, I can't shake the feeling that something is out there, watching, waiting. And now, I wonder. Maybe it's not just the mind that's haunted. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's been following me all along.